Hi, everybody. This is Yael Tamar, CMO and co-founder at SolidBlock. We're here to talk about London digital bonds and how you can invest and benefit from properties in London without buying and selling properties. So we're going to start with Alexander Aronsohn, who will talk about the London market and the trends and how the market is affected by various factors. And then we're going to continue on to talk about the London digital bonds and how the project originated and what type of returns the project provides, what is the philosophy for investment. And then we're going to continue to our financial analyst, Leo Rocha, who will present the financials for this project and explain in depth about the benefits that the investors get, such as annual returns. And then we will complete the presentation with our CEO, Yuval Wurzberger, who will show the platform through which investors will be able to invest. Then we'll be able to answer all of your questions. So while we are talking and presenting, you're welcome to share your questions through the Q&A on this platform, on the Zoom platform. You can also chat. You can answer your questions in the chat that's available as well. And I will be moderating and asking questions from the members of our big and impressive team. All right, so I would like to right now invite my friend and also also an expert in everything appraisal and a technology associated with it, Alexander Aronsohn. I'm going to add you as a co-host, so you can now unmute yourself and add your video. And we'll chat a little bit about the London market. How are you? How are you doing today?
Very well. I wish everything that you said about me was true, from your mouth to God's ears, as they say, but thank you very much. Very nice introduction.
Amazing. So please tell us a little more about the IVSC, and then, you know, what you're doing there and what exactly brought you to where you are today.
Okay, so I actually come from a background as a valuer, valuing portfolios around the world up to about 2 to 3 billion. And then about 10 years ago, I moved more to the standard setting side. I was the technical director of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. I'm the technical director of the International Valuation Standards Council. And what we're really trying to do is look at harmonization of valuation standards and practices around the world. And when we talk about valuation, we're talking about valuation with a big V. So that is business valuation, financial instruments into which your bonds would come as well, and tangible assets, so real estate, plant and machinery, etc. And it's basically so people compare like with like, apples with apples, oranges with oranges. So if you're in Dubai, where you are now, which is a lovely room that you're in, or you're in Tel Aviv, London, or elsewhere, you are getting the same valuation that you can compare for the same type of asset classes.
Amazing. So you're doing this globally, but you yourself live in the UK, right?
I live in the UK, but I'm a wide mix of nationalities, as you know. And also my work is global, so I often travel and work in other markets as well.
Amazing. So from what you see when you're traveling and your experience, how do people view the London market? I mean, I read that London is, or at least was before Corona, a top 4 global city for investment, you know, in terms of investment volume. So do people still view London this way, and what do you expect is going to happen?
Okay, so just looking at that from a few different perspectives. First of all, the London market is a bit of a misnomer, because London obviously is a big city. There are many sub-markets within London. So when you're talking about London, are you talking about Mayfair and the West End? Are you talking about the suburbs? Which part of the market are you actually talking about? If we look at central London, which is where a lot of investors tend to put in their investments, it's largely from a policy of diversification of assets. So they have some sort of security through having assets based in London if situations get difficult back home. And the issue that everyone is feeling with the coronavirus is probably that values have been affected. But with London, if you're looking over a medium to long term range, the values should hold and should continue to have demand, etc. But when we look around markets at the moment, it doesn't take a genius to work out that retail is having massive challenges at the moment. One's only got to look at the recent failure of some very large groups. Debenhams have been in the retail market for 252 years. And this is partly due to a sort of change in consumer habits. How many of us buy in the internet rather than go to retail? If we look at offices, offices are highly challenged now as well. Many people have been working from home virtually for a number of months. And businesses are beginning to look and saying, well, if you can work so effectively from home, why are we paying all this money for office space? What will happen to the office space in the future? Will it convert back to residential? Will people just have meeting rooms that are within the center of town where they can hold meetings, but more and more people will be working virtually? Which was probably a way that things were beginning to move, but maybe the coronavirus crisis acted as a catalyst. When we look at industrial, it's one of the few parts of the asset classes that has actually been doing well during the coronavirus crisis. They still need places for logistics. People like Amazon, Alibaba, etc. will still need places where they can store their goods and can deliver them. And when we look at residential, it's still very much uncertain at the moment. What we'll probably see is a lot of change of use in asset classes. So asset classes that have previously been offices may be converted to residential in secondary areas. We also might move to a trend where assets aren't built for a particular purpose, but are flexible so they can adjust to the needs of the market.
Amazing. So I like what you said about, people are realizing and offices are realizing and companies are realizing that they don't need to keep the office space because everybody's working from home and they're doing a good enough job or, sometimes even a better job. So people that are living, in the central London, they are saying, why do I have to pay so much money for living here? So where, I can live a little bit further away and have a bigger house with an extra room and then pay the same while my kids are still going to attend schools in London and so on, but have a better quality of life. So I personally definitely identify with this trend and think it's happening everywhere, not in London. But I'm wondering, what are people going to still consider London as like this beacon of real estate investment, especially people from all around the world when they're trying to diversify? Are they going to consider London as the safer option than investments in their own country? Also, how does Brexit come into play?
These are all very good questions, and if I knew the answers, we'd all make a lot of money, to be honest with you. But first of all, I mean, if we look at central London, I believe central London will hold. It's a financial centre. It will continue to be a financial centre. We're not sure how Brexit will actually affect it or what form of Brexit we're going to currently face. But it's definitely true that a lot of people are moving outside London, but a lot of central London is not actually occupied by Londoners. If we could afford to occupy it, I would be very happy, but there is a general movement where people are moving out to the suburbs, or in Paris where people are moving out to the regions and they're looking at a better quality of life. But there will always be a demand for London. The capitals are always the capitals, but yes, there will be some movement and there may be some adjustments in the market. But that goes back to the point of whether you're looking short term, medium term, or long term. I believe that in the short term, yes, there will be variances within the market. There will be effects that trickle through, and people who can interpret those effects are probably those who will be able to make the most financial advantage. In the medium to long term, I don't see London stopping from being a main investment hub. We've got a lot of parts of the world, China, Middle East and elsewhere, that will always gravitate to and invest in London. And it's also quite a convenient point, if we're ever allowed to get on a plane again, to actually get to different countries in the world.
Exactly. I mean, I remember a few years back, at least Heathrow was one of the largest airports in the world, right?
Yeah.
And or the busiest. Yeah. Okay. Very cool. So what you mentioned, about the trends in London, that's very, very interesting because, in the short term, you expect the prices to go down with the demand to go down. But I've seen in many cities in the world actually, or, especially suburbs, I've seen the prices have gone up in the first, few quarters of 2020 at least. So, you're in a you working obviously for this international standard organization for the appraisals, and you come from the appraiser background. What have you seen in terms of prices? Are there distressed assets right now? Are some assets on sale? What's happening in London?
So no one is admitting any asset is distressed. It's a bit like having a distressed family member. You keep it as a secret. The question is, why would you be selling if you're not thinking that you could get the maximum for your asset at this point in time, unless there is a reason that you need to do it? So
you need some money.
So it is the market. There is the market at the moment. We're not seeing it reflected in prices, but then often it's very difficult to find the comparable evidence. People are valuing a lot on sentiment, and a lot of our comparable transactions are looking at pre-COVID. Now, there are sort of people who may be taking a punt or taking a view on what will happen in the future, but we're not seeing massive decreases in the market, but that might also be sort of counterbalanced by the fact that there have been stamp duty and other savings at the moment as a way to cope with the other coronavirus crisis. So we just have to look at the market and see what happens.
Awesome.
But I would question someone who sells now, because why would I sell now if I think I can get more 6 months later?
Exactly, absolutely. Well, that's the premise of what we're doing, and obviously we may not call it distrust, but it's the sellers who need liquidity right now. And apparently, I personally know quite a few people, at least in Israel and in New York, that had to sell. That had to sell their property because they needed liquidity. So, I'm assuming in London you have quite a few of those as well. So, the last question that I'd like to ask you as our time is coming to an end, well, actually maybe pre-last, what do you think is going to happen to mortgages and the loans for real estate?
It's quite difficult to work out at the moment. Obviously, the banks are very concerned. I could see them as reducing the level of loan to value that they're willing to offer, and they're already beginning to do that. I could see them looking far harder at the surety of income and the surety of employment of the people who are looking for the mortgages as well. So I would expect that it would be a period where you would have more hoops to jump when you need a loan.
Got it. Absolutely. Okay, and any last words of wisdom and clarity from you, Alexander?
I think London will always be a hub for investors. I think that if you're looking in the short term, that's where the difficulty is. But in the medium to long term, I would assume that London and other key markets will continue to be key markets, and people will continue to invest them. And it's not only that, it's also the political stability as well. It's seen as a country that's quite stable, and therefore your investment is quite safe.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Actually, I think, definitely one of the most stable markets that you don't hear from very much. When there are elections, you kind of just realize that someone else is in the house, and that definitely does not happen in the US. So, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on board with us and talking about the local market.